Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's session of Saturday Talk. We are again privileged to have Dr. Arunkumar Sampath. Dr. Arunkumar Sampath has 27 years of experience in the gamut of automotive and aerospace defense fields, including sustainable mobility, 5G networks, AI and edge computing, HEV, EV, hydrogen and fuel cells, drones and air taxis, autonomous and connected technologies, automotive electronics, cybersecurity, EV charging, and MS from Villanova University, USA in the year 1993. After which he did his PhD from University of Maryland, US in the year 1997. He is currently employed with Tata Consultancy Services, TCS, in Chennai as a principal consultant and industry advisor, which is a 100% EV startup from Mahindra. His work as a project leader, next gen XUV, XUV mild hybrid, and SsangYong Tivoli India variant. He was the chairman of First Sci India conference on hydrogen and gas-based economy. Dr. Arun has written numerous articles on advanced technologies, including the 5G networks, next gen computing, etc. And he is also associated with JanyuTech since long. Today, he is going to speak on e-fuels in the journey towards next zero emissions. Dr. Arunji, over to you from here.
So, essentially, the topic is e-fuels in the journey toward net zero. I will give you some background. We have been working closely with, as you may know, in fact, in the next maybe a week or two, there will be a formal announcement between Tata and also Airbus. So, Tata Advanced Systems Limited, Castle in Hyderabad and other companies, and we have been doing a lot of work in the aerospace domain. So one of the topics that came up during some discussions, client discussions is, we have a challenge with respect to emissions reductions, because one of the industries that is extremely difficult to reduce the emissions is aerospace industry. So when you look at this particular graph, so when you look at this emissions graph in billions metric tons, this is about 60-year graph, like say from 1964 till about 2024, almost 60 years. For the last 60 years, what you notice is it is pretty much rising. I wish my stock market, stock price is like this, but unfortunately it's not. But this is the emission. So what you notice is between in the last
Sir, the slide has not changed. I've
not changed the slide.
Okay.
Are you on the? I'm on the second slide. Sorry.
You're showing the first slide.
This is the problem. There is a network issue. Can you see it now?
Yes, sir. Now it's visible.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like there is an issue. Okay, I will just keep it like this. So what you notice is there is a significant amount of global emissions over the last 60 years that have been going on, that has been increasing steadily, and this aviation industry is very difficult to reduce the emissions. Okay? So only grace for us was during the COVID, when literally the entire world shut down. There was almost like 500% drop year-over-year drop in the GHG emissions. And what you notice is the total GHG emission from fossil fuels and industry has reached a record high of 37.55 in 2020. So all of us are very much aware of climate change. All of us are very much aware of excessive rain, floods, etc. that have been happening around the world, not just in India alone. So all of us are aware of it, and it is a direct implication from the climate change. Okay? And this is the background information. Now, because in fact, in the next 2 weeks, there is going to be a COP meeting again in Baku, Azerbaijan, where India will also talk about its achievements towards net zero, etc. In fact, you may have noticed in the last couple of days when the BRICS meeting was held in Kazan, Russia, it was primarily India and maybe China that has reached most of the targets that we have committed. So, in fact, the developed world, they are far behind with respect to reaching the emissions targets, because they have taken specific targets, let's say net zero 2050 or net zero 2060, etc. And in fact, they are significantly delayed. Number one. Number two, they also agreed to commit funding. So even in the funding front, there are lots of challenges. Okay? So that is in fact. I'm on slide 3. Can you see slide 3?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So what you notice is this is a curve or a graph produced by Roland Berger Associates. I had a chance to look at the report and I got this. What you notice is pre-COVID, they actually predicted that the emissions will go up like this. Okay. Fortunately or unfortunately for us, COVID came and the emissions have actually significantly dropped. As you saw in the previous slide, there has been a 500% drop, and because of that, the emissions are still increasing. But fortunately for us, there's a big gap between what was projected and where we are today. Okay? But the numbers are still high. We have to go down significantly. And by the way, aviation industry contributes almost 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, reduction of these emissions is very difficult. I will walk through those details in next. Now, EU regulations, they have passed in the Parliament, EU Parliament, they have passed a bunch of different regulations with respect to aviation emissions reduction. It's called Center for Aviation and European Union (CAPA). So what this says is it has come out with specific mandates. One is mandate to increase the use of sustainable air fuel at EU airports. This has been mandated. Means if you are an Emirates airline or Air India or Lufthansa or whoever you are, if you have to fly through Europe or if your flight has to originate from Europe, then there is a specific mandate to use a certain amount of sustainable air fuel. You may recollect that in India also, Nitin Gadkari has been pushing significantly for ethanol blending in the petroleum so that our import bill in the petroleum could go down and we could also reduce the emissions. So you are very well aware of it. Something similar here, 2% is mandated in 2025 and this number is increased to 70% by 20. In the sense, unless you do some things like this, you may never reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal that we have taken. In fact, if we don't do anything today, sometimes we are literally at a point of no return. In fact, there was an article about a week ago that we have about 70 to 80% of animals, they are literally getting close to extinction and we are at a point of no return. Same with the Amazon forest in Brazil and Argentina, etc. We are literally at a point of no return because we have done so much of deforestation. So there is a challenge for us that if we have to meet the goals with respect to net zero, we must act immediately. There is no more time. Okay? And in fact, EU, what they said was, whether you are let's say Uber or Travigo or any other website, if you are allowing customers to book flights from your website, then the customer should be given a choice. In fact, even today, if you go to Indigo or if you go to any of the travel website, even in India, if you have to fly from say Kochi to Delhi or Chennai to Pune, etc., a bunch of different flight operations are given to you. You can make the choice. And in fact, the CO2 emissions, approximate CO2 emissions are also included. So it is not only the price that the consumers are given a choice to choose, it is also the amount of emissions that particular flight does, so that you could make an intelligent choice. So this has been mandated in EU regulation. And the next thing what they said was, they said that they have started an environmental initiative as part of the EU's Fit for 55 plan. It's called a Refuel EU. This mandates that the hydrogen used in producing e-fuels, it must be generated using renewable electricity, that is green hydrogen, with a direct air capture of CO2. This has been mandated. Now, lots of times, for example, even in India, when you look at the solar power, the wind power, etc., what we are trying to do is we are trying to come out with new renewable energy options. Whereas in Germany and other places, some of the politicians were arguing that they will replace the existing, let's say, coal-based or some other placed thermal plant that produces electricity, and then they will make it environmentally friendly. But EU mandate clearly says it cannot be the changing of the existing one. It must be something new. That means the environmental initiative says that these, what we call renewable power sources that are used, they must be brand new. Okay? It should be a greenfield project. Okay? That is the mandate. The next thing is they have set the targets to reduce the GHG emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to the 1990 level. Okay? For example, in slide number 2, you saw the levels, and then now what EU says is by 2030 you must be more than half where you were in 1990. So that is the mandate. And how do you reach there? They in fact gave a roadmap also. For example, they said 1.2% there should be a synthetic fuel blend in the current aviation fuel, and it should go to say 2.2% and then 5% in 2035 and 35% in 2050. So what you notice is almost 30% increase in between, let's say, 2030 and 2050. Means in the 20 years, aviation fuel demand, energy demand to produce the aviation fuel, etc. And unfortunately, if we don't do it, then we may never be able to meet the goals that we have agreed. That is the challenge. I'll go to next slide number 4, slide number 5, sorry. Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Now, this is a slide that I borrowed from Precedence Research, that particular website. What they are saying is, in about 10 years, there will be a significant amount of e-fuel market size. As I told you in the previous slide, EU has mandated that you must have so much of blending on the current aviation fuel, so much of blending has to be done. Now, if you have to do it, obviously your production of e-fuels, etc., should also increase. Okay? Otherwise, you cannot meet the target. So, it is expected to reach about 646 billion by 2022. That's what you're seeing. That means e-fuels market will rise on an average CAGR 18% in the next 10 years. Okay, that is expectation. Now, even in this, what EU says is, for example, the liquid segment of e-fuels accounted for almost the largest market share of 77%. For example, it is not the liquid hydrogen, but it is the methanol, ethanol, etc., the liquid fuels that have been blended with the current aviation fuel. That they accounted for almost 77%. The next thing is the power to liquid e-fuels production method with a market share of about 59% was the most dominant. Means they have been producing different fuels such as methanol, ethanol, propane, e-kerosene, etc. from renewable energy sources and direct air capture and all. So that the market share has been almost 40%. Okay. Now the next one is there are very clear challenges. As I told you, aerospace industry, especially the airline industry, because they carry huge number of passengers internationally, etc. And as you know, the sizes are only increasing, the weights are only increasing over long distances. Today, you know that some of the longest flights are 14 hours, 16 hours at a stretch. For example, Singapore to San Francisco, Bangalore to Los Angeles, etc. So you see almost 14, 16-hour flights. If that flight has to travel for 16 hours, 14 hours, it must carry so much of fuel and it should burn the fuel, etc. So you have it. The good news is because they cruise at a very, very high altitude, the fuel efficiency at that heights, it's quite good. In the sense they are not coming down, they are not going up, etc. Means landing, takeoff, etc. are not happening. So fortunately, in the long distance flights, the efficiencies are better. But still, the emissions are there. So the key success factors for the carbon emissions, we still have, unfortunately, even though we have, say, solar power or wind power or other sources of energy that is used for converting the carbon, etc., capturing the carbon, converting the carbon, etc. Final investment decision, it's called FID, for producing new plants for direct air capture or carbon capture technologies. They are significantly depending on government incentives. For example, in US, Joe Biden has passed on specific laws and he has passed on specific budgets to significantly improve within America the capability to produce carbon using renewable electricity. So that is also being done. So the plants are being set up, the regulations, etc., are being sought. But unfortunately, for all these plants to come up to full speed, it will take time. Okay, even if Biden has given go ahead for say 50 plants, you cannot build 50 plants overnight. It will take at least 5 to 6 years. So the challenge is you need to scale up and you need to commit the money and you need to start building the plants. So that is the challenge. The next thing is improvement in hydrocarbon synthesis. I will walk through this information in the next few slides. What you notice is like any combustion engine or any, let's say, fuel cell or anything like that, electric vehicle, etc. The efficiencies are dependent on the processes that you have, what kind of conversions you have. For example, what is your feedstock, what is the carbon content at the source, etc. So this will determine the overall efficiency of the process. So what the companies around the world, countries around the world are doing is they are trying to produce large amounts of kerosene using direct air capture. In fact, there are a couple of companies in Norway, Norway, Sweden, etc. They have already started building the plants and started doing limited production of DAC, and they are trying to scale up the next thing is hydrogen is also getting produced using electrolysis, using renewable energy sources, and the hydrocarbon synthesis is also happening. So you may be aware, even within India, NTPC has tied up with IOCL or BPCL has tied up with some other let's say Shell, etc. What they are trying to do is they are trying to significantly kerosene production, hydrocarbon production. So that is also being done. Now, the biggest challenge is after the renewable electricity cost, the biggest challenge is cost-effective e-kerosene commercial production. Today, the costs are significantly high. I will walk through that information in the next 2 slides. But this costs need to come down. If they need to come down, the massive scale has to happen. As I told you, even if Biden approves 50 plants, they cannot come overnight. They can come only in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. So in that 5 to 10 years, this cost will still be high. So that is another challenge. The third thing is because it's an aviation fuel which goes for the highest safety standards, there will be absolutely no compromise with respect to safety, with respect to combustibility, the emissions, etc. that this particular fuel has to adhere to. So compliance with ASTM D1655 and the sustainability standards defined by the aerospace industry. These fuels, whatever fuel that you develop, whatever blending that you do, they must adhere to these standards. Okay. So today, what a lot of companies have done. For example, even SpiceJet has done this. They have flown flights using biofuels, fuels that are essentially produced from renewable biomass or feedstock produced from waste. For example, let's say you have agricultural recipe. In fact, this is one of the challenges. We have stubble burning problem in Punjab, Haryana and all that. And we have an air pollution problem in Delhi because of that. So what we can do is, in fact, government has actually mandated these guys to not simply burn stubbles, use that feedstock to produce sustainable air fuel, etc. In fact, India produces tons and tons of municipal solid waste. So there are specific processes and plants that can use the municipal solid waste to convert this into usable fuels, etc. That is also. But today, the biggest source of feedstock for this carbon is fats, oils, and grease. Okay, essentially the cooking waste and residual meat from a meat, let's say, processing plant, etc. So these are the ones that are being used as a feedstock. Because the agricultural residue and all have certain challenges, and the municipal solid waste, I don't think it has come in every place, and I don't think it's still cost effective. So today the FOG is the primary feedstock, but FOG can only be produced in limited quantities, so that is another challenge. The inherent advantage of the sustainable air fuel is they have lower carbon intensity compared to the conventional jet fuels. I will walk through that in the next few slides. And as I told you, FOGs are the most used feedstock, but unfortunately they can only be produced in limited quantities. So this is a challenge. So on one hand, the plants have not been built, number one. Number two, the regulations are still not clearing all those plants. Number three, because of the safety issues, the testing and compliance, there is absolutely no let-up. It has to follow the mandated procedure. Number four, you have a challenge with respect to FOG coming in as limited quantity. So you have a bunch of different challenges to produce the e-fuels in aviation and reduce the GHG emissions from the airline industry. So you have a bunch of different challenges. Now, what you notice is if you have to produce a fuel that will replace the existing fuel, in fact, this was the debate that Nitin Gadkariji also had many times in the auto industry. So what you notice here is, okay, somebody may ask a question, boss, why should we reduce the emissions? And if we don't reduce the emissions, what happens? And if we have to reduce emissions, how much do we have to reduce? Okay. For example, when you look at this curve, this is essentially well-to-wake greenhouse gas emissions and reduction potential from international aviation. In fact, what EU has done in its mandate is it has given a very clear mandate for international flight and very clear mandate for domestic flights. So in this particular case, what you notice is because these flights go on a long distance and they carry a huge amount of load, etc., they produce a good amount of emissions also. Because if you have a 14-hour, 16-hour flight, compared to that, let's say you have only a 1-hour flight. Obviously, 1-hour flight produces much less emissions compared to a 16-hour flight. So what you notice is, if you are today here, let us say 2024 or whatever you are at this rate, okay, you are where this is where you are with respect to international aviation GHG emissions, megaton CO2. So this is where you are. Now, if you have to meet the net zero, even though your curve is going up, you should bring it down. Okay. In 2050, if you say net zero, or 2070 in the case of India, net zero, if you have to be at the same level as where you are today, then you must address this particular gap. And what is this gap? This gap is almost 21.6 gigatons of CO2. That is the gap, okay, that we must somehow reduce these emissions. If you don't do anything, then in the next 25 years, you will be here and you can never come back. It means there is no, it's at a point of no return. So you cannot afford that. So you must keep on reducing it. Now, how do you do it? About 7.8 gigatons is expected to come from aircraft technology improvements. For example, let's say today, Boeing 767-400 or 747-400, their efficiency, fuel efficiency is much higher than the similar aircraft that was produced in, let's say, 1960s, 1970s. Because the technology itself has improved, the engine design has improved, lightweight composites have improved, structural stability has improved. So many improvements have come in the aircraft design itself and the air traffic management itself, so that they have they can contribute almost 8 gigatons of greenhouse gas reductions. Okay. Because I told you, EU mandated that customers should be given a choice to not only purchase a ticket based on the dollar value or euro value, they should also be able to purchase an air ticket with respect to the amount of CO2 emissions that are coming out from that particular flight. So in that mandate, so if you have to reduce it, then you can do it with respect to aircraft technology improvements itself. Okay? And the next one is, as I told you, if you have specific flight, if it has to travel, let's say 2 hours, 3 hours, you can always do an improved air traffic management where the flights could fly at say 25,000, 30,000 feet, and then where the resistance is significantly low, there is no turbulence, etc. And then the efficiency could be improved. So that is the second area. The third area is, even if you do all these things, you can still meet only about say 13 or 12 or 13 gigatons. You add this. So there is still a gap of almost 9 gigatons, 8.8 gigatons. This is where your fuels, sustainable fuels need to come in, or e-fuels have to come in, and then they have to reduce this gap. Okay, so what you notice is aircraft design, air traffic management, sustainable air fuel. All three need to contribute, and then they need to bring this value down. Okay, that's what. I don't know if you're aware, about 6 months ago, Jyotiraditya Sindhu, when he was the Honorable Minister for Civil Aviation, today he is the Minister for Steel and Northeast, etc. He has actually convened a meeting in ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. So India has signed up, is a signatory to this, and today we are working closely with foreign airlines in maintaining the aircraft, overhauling the aircraft, etc. MRO. I think in Nasik. That is also big. Any questions? So I will go to the next slide. Slide number 9. Can you see it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what some research has done is they have taken an existing aircraft and I told you they have improved the combustion process, NOx emissions, etc. Then they have started experimenting with bunch of different fuels. Which fuel combination, which design combination will give me the best emissions. So what they have done is they have taken a specific Boeing 767-300. They call this as B261 mid-range aircraft. Now they started making specific modifications in the materials in the engine. For example, what they said was they have designed an advanced high bypass ratio turbofan engine. They developed it, and then they could employ a low NOx and low soot technology in the combustion process, and also high aspect ratio carbon fiber reinforced wings. So these are some of the design changes that were made. As I told you in the previous slide, your aircraft design should also change. Only then the sustainable air fuel usage will make sense. So what they're trying to do is, how do you understand what is the implications of these design changes and what would be the tentative reduction in emissions? So what you notice is, as you go from the baseline towards this particular design, where you have, let us say, D261 plus means something what is called by the way, this design, as I told you, is 1986 baseline. So between 86 and 2040, for example, let us say about 50 years have passed. In the last say 55 years, how will this technology help us reduce the emissions? That's what this study finds out. What you notice is your NOx significantly goes down because, as I told you, this is a low NOx technology and low soot technology engine. So your NOx, etc., will go down significantly. And you see the same thing. This is, by the way, the fossil kerosene, means using the existing aviation fuel, existing aviation kerosene fuel. Okay. The only change is in the aircraft design and the aircraft engine itself. Okay. Now, from there, what the researchers have done is they said, okay, boss, I will take a drop-in fuel. As I told you in the previously, drop-in fuel is essentially something that can balance out the gravimetric and volumetric energy densities. So they have tested this particular fuel in this particular aircraft design also, and they noticed that there is a significant amount of NOx reduction from here to here. Okay. However, you have noticed that the brown one, which is the CO2, the CO2 is also going. Okay, because the CO2 here is much higher. The CO2 is going. The next one you see is essentially synthetic fuels, etc., that they have prepared with specific, sulfur content or low sulfur content, etc. So, and they wanted to see what is the change as you go from here to here. Okay? So, essentially, this graph tells you the design changes and then the implications of the design changes and what would be the tentative benefit with respect to GHG emissions. So, in this particular design, you notice 40% drop in CO2 and H2O levels, with almost 30% increase in NOx, because this is the baseline design. There was no low NOx design, etc. But when you start introducing the low NOx and low soot engine technology, you notice that the fossil kerosene to a drop, it's a 30% blend. And what they notice is it's a significant drop with respect to CO2. Whereas here you got 40%, now you got almost 73%. It means 3/4 of your CO2 levels have come down. Okay. Now, the next one is they experimented with another fuel called synthetic fuel. This synthetic fuel, as I told you, has specific low sulfur content, etc. So that also has given very good CO2 emissions. Okay. So what the researchers are saying is, okay, take care. Now we can experiment with this bunch of different fuels, and we have modified the engine technology. We have modified the air traffic management. We have modified the aircraft design itself. Now we are on the right track with respect to reducing the emissions. Okay. So that is what the researchers are working on right now. Whether it is for example, Blue Jet Air or Lufthansa or Rolls-Royce or British Airways, all these guys, they have formed a consortium and they are testing out these different combinations and then testing them out in the labs. That's what they're doing. And of course, they are doing some limited trials, flight trials also to generate. Now, the next one is you will say, okay, the experiments, etc., are fine. Now, if I have to mass produce the fuels, now I may have a bunch of different options. Okay, the bunch of different options can give me different fuels with a different carbon content. Of course, the process efficiency, the cost, etc. So, if you look at the sources, as I told you, the EU mandated that you must produce the green hydrogen using renewable electricity, etc. Now, if your feedstock is, let us say, an industrial point source, let's say like a cement industry or a steel industry, or let us say if you are a significant amount of solar power, okay, or a wind energy, etc., or a biomass, as I told you, the food, oil, FOGs, etc. They could also be used as a feedstock. Or in the case of Israel, for example, they are doing a significant amount of desalination because they don't have much natural resource of water. So they do a lot of desalination. And from the desalination, what can you do next? So that is also being used as a feedstock. Now, using this, you go to the next step, what is called the capture. Means you capture the carbon using a bunch of different technologies and processes. And then you put into what is called a limited electrolysis or co-electrolysis processes, and then produce an intermediate product. Let's say you have a Reliance refinery in Gujarat. Okay, so what you notice is it produces a bunch of different fuels. Let's say propane, methane, ethane, diesel, kerosene, and all. So you have intermediate products that you can produce. Now from here you have to produce what is called the e-fuels. Means essentially e-kerosene or gasoline or diesel or liquefied hydrogen, etc. So what you notice is you have a bunch of different options with respect to feedstock, with respect to process, with respect to electrolysis, with respect to the output. So there are, of course, the production processes are there. There are specific synthesis that are being done. But at the end of the day, there has to be a certification that this sustainable air fuel will commit to or will comply with ASTM B7566 standards. This is the standard mandated by airline industry. Okay. So what you notice is you have a bunch of different pathways, but they have to meet specific standards. Okay, that is the message. Now, even though you may have a bunch of different processes, now let us understand what are the efficiencies. Not every process, every combination will give you the highest overall efficiency. So when you look at this renewable electricity, water electrolysis, for example, desalination and all that, typically the efficiency is quite high, let's say about 70%. But from here, as you go towards renewable hydrogen or carbon dioxide capture or FT synthesis conversion, going towards the e-kerosene, your overall efficiency drops down to let's say 40% for fuel diesel, say 40% for e-kerosene. If you are producing propane or naphtha, etc., it is only like 10%. So what you notice is you may have started out quite well here, but by the time you reach here, your efficiency is less than 50%. The max you can get is say 40%. So the challenge is how do you identify the right combination that will help you produce the e-fuels. Okay, that is where the research is happening. As I told you, if you have to reduce the GHG emissions from the aviation, the carbon demand has to go up. Okay, means you should be able to produce the e-kerosene, etc., using carbon dioxide during using a bunch of different processes that I showed you in the previous slide. And accordingly, the e-kerosene production should also go up. Okay, now for this production to go up, your energy consumption will also go up. Okay, so essentially there are like bunch of different implications. So you cannot say I reduced my aviation emissions, but I did emissions somewhere else. So obviously that is not net zero. So the challenge for the researchers is, even though you are saying I'm producing carbon dioxide, I'm producing e-kerosene, I'm trying to bring down the emissions from the aviation, you are burning somewhere else and you are increasing the emissions somewhere else. Okay, that is a challenge. So even though you say the total CO2 demand has to peak and then come down as you go from say 2025 to say 2050, now your energy demand is also going up. Now where is the energy demand going up? Significantly in the rest of the world other than Europe and US. For example, let's say India, China, Southeast Asia and all that. So the significant energy demand is there. Okay, so that is the one challenge. The second challenge is the technology is not always mature. Not every single technology, as I told you in the previous slide, you have a bunch of different processes, different efficiencies, etc. But the technologies not always mature. They are at a different level of maturity. The TRL levels are different. So what you notice is the researchers are trying to figure out how do you identify, or let us say you are working with a technology that is at TRL level, let's say 3 or 4 today. Now, how do you go from 3 or 4 towards TRL 7 or 8? How do you go there? So this is where a lot of research is happening, financial and policy push is happening, so that the renewable electricity, e-kerosene production, etc., could be done. Okay? So what you notice here is in this particular graph, there is a significant amount of CO2 demand and e-kerosene demand that needs to be met. As I told you, even if you produce 50 plants, I mean, even if Joe Biden gives go ahead for 50 plants, you cannot, erect 50 plants tomorrow. They will take time. So if you have to significantly ramp this up, you must start today, or you must have already started by now. Okay. So there is almost like a 8x demand in CO2, demand in e-kerosene compared to the existing levels. And only then you can reach the net. So the next one is carbon capture cost. So previously we looked at the processes, we looked at the different feedstocks, we looked at different synthesis, for example, the process efficiencies and what is the demand that is required and all that. Now you say, okay, boss, all these are fine. Now what is the relative cost comparison? Which technology? Let's say there is a TRL3, there is a TRL8, but the TRL8 may be much more expensive compared to the TRL3. So you would rather focus on TRL3 and make it towards a TRL7 or 8 compared to working with something like TRL8. So some of these calls need to be taken based on this particular graph. What you notice is the cost is directly dependent on the amount of CO2 concentration in the source. If the amount of CO2 concentration is very high, as I told you with respect to, let us say, a steel plant or a cement plant, etc., this concentration is the red dots. The concentration is very high, let's say 95+%, then your costs are significantly lower for conversion because you got almost very good amount of carbon, very good amount of CO2 concentration. So your efficiencies are going to be quite high if you have to capture carbon. Now, if you go towards other plants, let us say bioethanol or ethylene, etc., even though their the CO2 concentrations are still high, as I told you, the TRL levels need not be higher, the efficiencies may not be higher, so your costs are still in the middle range. Okay. Now, if you go towards, let's say, hydrogen, as I told you, hydrogen as a fuel, it is promising, but it cannot be an independent energy carrier. So if you use, let's say, steam methane reforming, etc., using coal and all that, it need not be green. It could be, say, blue hydrogen or a gray hydrogen or whatever. You notice that the concentration varies depending on the the quality, input quality of coal that is being used and all. In fact, you may be aware when Modi ji went to BRICS meet just a few days ago. Now he has struck a deal with Mongolia to import the coking coal from Mongolia because they noticed that coal is of high standards and they are able to import it. So that is also being pursued right now. So what you notice is iron and steel, as I told you, they have a very high concentration of, decently good concentration of CO2, but the price varies. Similarly in the cement. So what this slide tells you is you cannot blindly dependent on one particular process or one particular feedstock. There is a cost. There is a cost also involved with respect to that particular process. Okay, that is the takeaway. And the cost is directly dependent on the concentration of CO2 that is there in the source. Now, you can say, okay, the costs are there. Now, EU, US, China, etc., they have started giving incentives to their companies so that they can produce the e-kerosene, etc. So, what is the trend that is going to look like? Okay, because as you know, Reliance has started giving away literally very cheap data, and that is where India has started, using UPI and a higher amount of data coverage, data usage, etc. in India because the price has significantly come down because the scale is very high. So, if you are able to do something like that with respect to e-kerosene production in US, EU, etc., compared to the current jet fuel that is already there, what you notice is there is a specific trend with respect to production cost. So, what this is saying is the production cost in US is significantly lower compared to the production cost in EU. You may ask why. That's because of two reasons. Number one, EU as an entity, the renewable electricity costs are significantly higher compared to US. That is a fact. That is one of the primary reasons why the production cost of of the e-fuel is going higher compared to the US. Okay, that is a fundamental reason. So researchers have identified this, and they are saying, okay, how do we incentivize for this renewable electricity to come down? Okay, that is one aspect. When it's line up and they are aligned, it's literally impossible to meet the net zero goals. Whether it's a 2050 or 2060 or 70, it's literally impossible. Okay, and I told you in this particular graph. Sorry, I'm going back. In this particular graph, can you see this graph? This one, slide number 8. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what you notice is this 8.8 has to come from sustainable air fuel. Okay, this cannot be avoided. So if you have to bring this down, then this incentive and this cost need to be coming down. You have no other choice. they must have. Okay? So the conclusions are e-fuels, especially e-kerosene, produced from renewable electricity, they have very close to zero to well, zero, very almost zero well to wake GHG emissions, and they act as a drop-in fuel. As I told you, they have equivalent gravimetric and volumetric energy density. So it will literally act as a drop-in fuel compared to the existing aviation. Okay. The next thing is, as I told you, if you have to meet the net zero targets by 2050, let's say US, EU, etc., the CO2 production must go up by almost eight times. It has to go, and in the next 1 decade, literally 15 years, it has to be 8 times. The second thing is, as I told you, the relative comparison of total CO2 demand and the energy between US, etc. The rest of the world, almost 55 to 60% is being demanded by the rest of the world. For example, India, China, Southeast Asia, and all. Then, as I told you, the renewable electricity costs need to come down, and that will be a very, very key driving factor with respect to bringing the cost down. And I told you, unless you get a specific incentive from, let us say, US with respect to e-kerosene production, that curve can never cross the cost of the existing fuel. On the financial incentive, we first of all. Now you can say, okay, all this is fine. Now, what is the future work with respect to, let us say, now Biden has given you some money, or some Norway has given you some money, or Oman or Qatar, these guys have taken gas credits and all that. Okay, TK, all that is fine. What is next? What is next is, when you capture the carbon, not everything can be stored. Okay, so there must be focus on utilization also. Utilization means, are there other forms that carbon could be converted into? For example, you could do urea, you could produce urea, you could produce methane, methanol. So that could also be done. So that is where the researchers are focusing on. Not just carbon capture alone, but also utilization, means how do you convert into other products that can be used. The next thing is, because you have a bunch of different steps, as I told you with respect to the efficiencies, the overall efficiency is 50% at the end of the day. So the challenge for you is, can you integrate the carbon capture and also the conversion? Okay. Can you come out with some kind of a technique so that you have minimal additional costs? The energy demands are also being met, and you could use, for example, transient storage. You could use specific catalysts, let's say copper-based catalysts, solid metal organic framework, absorbents, etc. So some of these materials could be used, and you can improve the process efficiency. So this is exactly where the research is going on. Whether it is Korea or Europe or Germany or UK or US, this is where the research is happening. Okay, as I told you, solid absorbents, like they can serve the dual purpose of an absorber for CO2 and also catalyst for CO2 conversion. Means, as I told you, it could be both CC and also U. So these MOFs will help through all three of them, so that we are able to utilize copper-based catalysts as electrodes in the electrochemistry reactions for CO2 reduction. Okay, thank you very much.
I wanted to ask you, CBG is a very promising fuel for India, and I'm told that a lot of new plants are coming up, very, very micro plants all over the country. Is that true? And how much potential do we have? Can it cover the problem of carbon capture, carbon emissions?
Sir, today, as I told you, instead of e-kerosene, the world is trying blending. As I told you, for example, even in the auto industry, Nitin Gadkari is trying to build what is called flex fuel engines and also do the blending. So that blending, as I told you, even in the EU, they have mandated that you have to meet specific blending targets with the existing aviation fuel. So even if you have these micro-based plants, etc., plants, etc., at the end of the day, they will be utilized only for blending with the existing fuel. Okay? You cannot have a drop-in fuel overnight, because the technology, as I told you, the biggest challenge is the cost. So you cannot bring down the cost. So even if you have these plants, unless the costs come down commercially, they may not be viable. They can probably at most be used as a blending with the existing. This is what my guess.